Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Royal Photographic Society's Historical Group and the latest in a series of collection talks given by curators and experts on particular photographic collections from across the UK. I'd just like to start this evening, before we formally start, by acknowledging Gilly Reid, who's joined us this evening and is just recuperating from a short illness. So Gilly, it's really good to see you here, and thank you for joining us this evening. So this evening's talk is by Mary Burgess, who's a local studies assistant in the Cambridgeshire Central Library, and that houses one of the very significant collection of photography, the Post Office Terrace collection, that comes from a number of studios and includes many significant photographers from British photography. So it's a real pleasure to introduce Mary. She's been working in the collection and the local studies department of Cambridge Libraries for 8 years and is an expert on Cambridgeshire history. And it's really a real pleasure to have you share your knowledge with us this evening. So Mary, I'm going to hand over to you. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you very much. Well, first of all, I thought I'd introduce you to the collection itself. There we go. So we're the Cambridge Collection. As said before, we're the local studies department of Cambridgeshire Libraries. We're based up on Cambridge Central Library, but we do cover the county as a whole. What does that mean? Well, we deal with history of Cambridge and Cambridgeshire and the people, places and organisations of the county. And we do interpret that quite widely. So generally I get asked a lot, like, are you interested in this? And it's like, does it relate to Cambridgeshire in some way? Then yes, probably I am. So what do we have? We have books, pictures, maps, newspapers, also things like rowing oars, ties, packs of cards. I have to say, I'm not an expert on photography, so if I mention anything wrong in this talk, I do apologise. But yes, to start off with the Post Office Terrace studio itself, sorry, my laptop appears to want to play around. It started in 1865 and it ran right through to 1985, so there's 120 years of photography. It was a small studio just off the main street, just kind of round the corner from the bus depot and just near the market square, very central. The building itself doesn't exist anymore. It was knocked down to expand the bank next door, but the frontage is still there, although down a little passageway, rather hard to spot. There's some dispute about who owned the actual building, but Jesus College in Cambridge is the one who leased the building to the various photographers who had the business through the years. And it's one of the more exclusive photographers in Cambridge. Lots of students, lots of visitors, more expensive rates. You're less likely to find a random photo of an agricultural labourer and more likely to find a photo of a college don, for example. And it's almost entirely portrait photographs, with the earlier shots on half-plate glass negatives and then on to medium format for the portrait shots in about the 1930s on safety film, and then moving on to 35mm into the 70s and for colour pictures. We don't have everything that they ever produced, unfortunately. We do have over 300,000 negatives of a full range of people, visitors, academics, business people, children, and we also have various collections of architectural shots of Cambridge, and it's definitely our biggest individual collection of negatives by far. Who actually had who was there? Well, we start off, this is the photographers who were in the studio over the time. The first four don't last very long. John Palmer Clarke was the longest name, although various photographers operated under his name. Ramsey and Muspratt were the longest in post, and they had the studio from the 1930s right through to 1978, although that was mostly all Lettice Ramsey, as Helen Muspratt moved off to Oxford. We start at the start with Arthur Nicholls. He was originally from Norwich. He starts off in photography at 5 All Saints Passage in Cambridge in 1864, but in 1865 he moves into the studio in Post Office Terrace, which he converts. It was formerly a coach house or a department store, and he's probably best known as the originator of the triptographic carte de visite. So you can have 3 cameo images of the same sitter taken at different angles, or 3 different pictures all on the same card. So can be a nice way of advertising yourself. And we don't have any negatives. Well, we don't have any portrait negatives by him, but we do have some carte de visite by him, and I've scanned the back of one of them to give you an idea of his advertising on the back as well. He left Cambridge in 1877 and opened up a studio on the Isle of Wight. So that's. But as I say, we don't have any portraits by him, but we do have some of his old Cambridge street scenes. These are. Well, he seemed to like taking photographs of things he thought might disappear. He was right. They're mostly yards, passages, things like that that we don't have anymore. And often these are the only photos that we have of these places. And these are all these are both modern prints from his negatives. We don't have any original prints by him, unfortunately. But it gives you an idea of some of the less photographed areas of Cambridge. I mean, everyone's seen King's College Chapel, but these are some of these side streets, etc., that don't get photographed that often. We move on to John Edward Bliss. He was born in 1854 in Oxford, and he took over the Post Office Terrace studio from Arthur Nicholls in 1878. And he was elected a member of the Photographic Society of Great Britain the same year. We have various cards by him. He seems to like using lots of different mounts. He particularly, you can see from this one, reused old mounts from Arthur Nicholls and used his name a lot in his advertising. We don't have, well, there's not that much from John Edward Bliss because he died at the age of only 31 at Newport on the Isle of Wight, and his brother Henry James Bliss was his executor and sold his apparatus and stock in trade in June 1885. As a result, we only have negatives of later copies of his photos, so we don't copies of his carte de visite. We don't have any originals. And then we move on to Valentine Blanchard. He's a bit of a pain because his uncle is Valentine Blanchard Senior, who is also a photographer and moves off to London and sets up a studio there. But the younger Valentine Blanchard, who, well, both of them were from Wisbech, and the younger one sets up a studio in Lynn Road in Wisbech by 1883, and he takes over the studio at Post Office Terrace in November 1885 from the estate of John Edward Bliss. He puts a lot of money into the studio. He puts in electric lighting, and he advertises in the Cambridge Independent, which is a local weekly paper at the time, 80,000 candle electric light for evening photos. So if you particularly advertise for ladies who'd like photos of them in their ball grounds. And as a result, the studio was open from 9 o'clock in the morning to 9 p.m. And he used a gas-powered generator to power the lights because this is before Cambridge had mains electricity. He sets up in business with William Henry Lunn about roughly 1888, and he sets up another studio at 28 Hills Road in 1889 before he dissolves his partnership with William Henry Lunn in October 1889. Why is he suddenly dissolving his partnership? Could there be a scandal? Yes, there was. Valentine Blanchard gets married to a 17-year-old, and reasonably scandalous for the time. Valentine Blanchard Senior then has a large insurance payout for setting fire to his studio in London. Valentine Blanchard Jr. thinks, oh, this sounds like an excellent idea. Moves off to Bradford, commits insurance fraud, and then rather rapidly emigrates to Johannesburg in South Africa. So we move on with Colin Lunn. He's probably related to William Henry Lunn, although I've still not managed to find exactly how yet. He was born in Newport in Essex in 1860, and he takes over the studio in roughly 1890. And then here is him and the family on the left in his studio. And the back again of another of his carte de visite on the right. He publishes a book of views of Norfolk Broads in 1891, 12 photographs of details of his views. He's very much interested in boating, and particularly the Norfolk Broads, and he takes photos from his boat, and that's where he explains in great detail about his boat and how wonderful the Norfolk Broads are. Unfortunately, we haven't got a copy of the book here. The copies that came up for sale for £365, a little steep for us. But John Palmer Clarke takes over in 1893, and Colin Lunn moves off to Oxford. We do actually have some pictures by Colin Lunn, which is lovely. So here's some pictures from him. Lots of students, particularly those from abroad. On the right, for example, is Arthur Boy Quadley Paflenstow, who was born in Accra, now in Ghana. He was born in 1869. He's the first black graduate of Christ's College, and he studied law and was called to the bar at Lincoln's Inn in 1897. And on the right is Mr. Ramsey from Karachi in India, and he's a student of St. John's College. He also studied law and was called to the bar in 1896. And we've also got a pair of tennis players here. They're from Newnham College, one of the 2 colleges for women. And then the lady looking very theatrical on the right is Bethany Pilsner, and she was an Irish actress who toured theatres around the country in leading roles. She seems to really like this picture because she uses it a lot in some of her advertising for headshots, etc., for quite a few years afterwards. And then we're on to John Palmer Clarke. He's born in Bury St Edmunds in 1854 to a photographic family. He sets up his own studio in 7 Angel Hill in Bury St Edmunds in 1891 before taking over the Post Office Terrace studio in 1893. We still have some cards by him as well. Here's what some of the backs looks like. He's advertising still the electric lighting. That's still exciting and worth advertising. But now you can do lovely kitschy things like have your picture being put on porcelain mugs, plates, etc. to use as gifts, which I love. I think it's brilliant. And by 1895, Charles E. Goodrich and Frederick Sanderson, some of his 2 assistants, are running the business, but they're still using J. Palmer Clarke as the name of the studio until Ramsey and Muspratt take over in the 1930s. And here we see some of shots while John Palmer Clarke was still in charge. There's slightly later. On the left, we've got a lady who's a nurse at Addenbrooke's. And on the right, the gentleman, Sidney Coulson, is a butcher by trade, who also has a sideline as a pianist, hence the music book that he's holding, and he ends up working in cruise ships. And then we've got Miss Taylor with her concert guitar, and Sidney Capel Peck, who read natural sciences at Sydney Sussex before he goes into the military and ends up being a major general. And then we've got Charles Edward Goodrich, and he was born in Bedford. He moves around a lot. He starts his photographic career in Dublin, marries his wife in Bangor in North Wales in 1889 before he moves to Cambridge, and he takes over the studio with Frederick Sanderson. He has 2 photographs accepted for the Royal Photographic Society exhibition in 1903, and he's the one who's doing most of the portraits. And here is a portrait of him from about 1920. And he retires in the summer of 1933 and dies following year. And we start to see his pictures. Definitely more of an Edwardian feel to the photographs, and I would say that he's definitely a much better technical photographer than some of the previous people. They're always well focused. Lots of First World War soldiers. Lots of them have been researched by various local history societies, and lots of full face shots, which I always think is interesting. And some of them have been rather damaged, haven't always been stored in the best of conditions, but you also do see start to see more children, as Charles Goodrich specialised in pictures of children. The other half of the business was Frederick Herbert Sanderson. He was a local man. He was born in Cambridge in 1855, and he trained as a cabinet maker before moving into photography. He was working from 1895 in Bridge Street, and he joined the Post Office Terrace studio in 1896, and then later took over the company with Charles Goodrich. He's elected a member of the Royal Photographic Society in 1901, and he also chairs the organising committee of the Photographic Convention of the United Kingdom in 1902, which was in Cambridge. But he's probably best known nowadays because he filed 8 patents from 1895 to 1907 for improvements to cameras. And he was a big fan of taking photos of architecture, and he's the person who took most of the famous early shots of Cambridge and that kind of period. So he being a woodworker, he really knows his stuff, and he likes being able to set the front of his camera to any angle. So you could take photos of church roofs, you could take photos of things like that without getting your camera moving around. So he has 10 different models of his patented cameras sold over 44 years and is known as Sanderson cameras. And the outfit is, he's a key member of the Cambridge Volunteer Fire Brigade, and during the First World War he was in charge of the Cheston sub-branch, which is him in his uniform with all the bells and whistles. And he dies in 1929, and Goodrich carries on alone until he sells up to Ramsey and Muspratt. And he took lots of the architectural shots around Cambridge, lots of the advertising postcards, etc. But he also took various photos of the first Great Eastern Hospital, which was a field hospital set up in Cambridge during the First World War on the site of what's now the University Library. So it gives you an idea of what the wards were like, all open-sided, all, by the sound of it, incredibly cold. And then the wards themselves inside as well. So I mean, that's really nice. We've got quite a set of these. Gives you an idea of what people were looking like at the time. We move into the future, into the 1930s with Lettice Ramsey. She's from Ireland. She studied university here in Cambridge at Newnham College. She studied philosophy, and she married Frank Ramsey in 1925, who was a mathematician. But unfortunately, he died of liver disease in 1930 at the age of only 26, leaving her with 2 small children, a widow, and in the 1930s. Okay, how do I make some money? So she decided that, well, photography sounded like fun. And so she studies for a term at Regent Street Polytechnic in London, and she sets up in business with Helen Muspratt. Helen had already had a photographic studio. She knew what she was doing. Lettice Ramsey knew Cambridge. She knew the dons. She knew college porters. She knew who to go to get a new business up and running. And the studio itself started in 1932 at 20 St Andrew Street, just round the corner, but it moved in 1934 to Post Office Terrace. And we have a reasonably complete set of studio diaries, certainly surviving for the earlier years, 1932, 33, 35, 42, 43, etc., etc. But we also have a card index of portraits from 1937 through to 1978. And I'll be talking more about Mr. Brunney and Nicholas Lee a bit later on. The other half of the studio was Helen Muspratt. She was born in India, but she was brought up in Swanage, and she was the one who actually did the studying. She enrolled in the Regent Street Polytechnic in 1926 and set up a photographic studio in Swanage in 1928. And then they later set up again in Cambridge in 1932. And she also travelled to the Soviet Union in 1936 and took photos over there. We're not going to be talking too much about her because she set up the Oxford branch of the photographic studio in 1937. And originally they were planning on sharing the staffing between them, using the varsity line to basically shuttle up and down between Cambridge and Oxford. And also work in London. They kind of do a golden triangle type idea, but they soon decided that this was frankly far too much time sitting on trains, and also particularly with the war dying up, they start to work a lot more separately. So I would say that, well, I mean, the company itself split into 2 in 1947, and Helen Muspratt takes out control of the Oxford studio and Lettice Ramsey in Cambridge. If you want to know more about Helen Muspratt and what she got up to, particularly in Oxford, I would thoroughly recommend this book, Face, Shape and Angle by Jessica Sutcliffe. It's excellent and gives you a much better idea of what they were getting up to in Oxford than frankly I know much more about. So yeah, well worth a look. What were they doing in Cambridge? Well, you've got portrait photos from Ramsey, lots more group shots, a lot more people. They specialise in putting people at ease. They particularly seem to really like this sofa thing in the 1940s. There were loads of photos of people lounging all over it. Don't know why, but you know. Lots of more shots being taken per sitting, 5, 10, 15, sometimes more. And then we're moving on to medium format safety film, so it's all square negatives and lots of 3/4 views. So almost all of our photos are 3/4 views from this kind of period. And I've also managed to find some of their original prints from the studio framed up for exhibition. And there's a lady from Uganda on the left and one of the students on the right. I have to say the Ugandan lady is mildly interesting just because she's taken outside, which is quite unusual. Almost all of their photos are taken in a studio. But this advertising sign from the 1950s kind of gives you an idea of some of their earlier shots. And also you can see the two gentlemen in uniform. To start with, I have to say that they're quite snobby about doing things like taking passport photos, and then the war comes along and they're going, oh, actually we could really do with some cash. I think passport photos, ID cards, and the university, basically what we'd call now the university HR department, the appointments board, for some reason they wanted a photograph of everybody when they were doing applications, so that they get quite a lot of money for doing those, although they really do complain about having to do it. Apparently it's very boring. But yeah, they also, particularly during the war, go off to in Cambridgeshire, there's lots of American Air Force bases. So they go off to those and take photos of American forces, men and women, Red Cross nurses, for example, take lots of photos. And we also have, as a result, their forces numbers, their addresses back home, what size of pictures they wanted sending off to, oh, I want this one to go to my mum and this one to go to my girlfriend, etc., etc. So that's really nice to see. I mean, it shows you just how many people from all across the world were coming here to Cambridge. And we also have some of their theatrical performances. Cambridge has one professional theatre, the Arts Theatre, and they get the contract in the 1940s and to 50s to take photographs of the performances, and they're sold in, well, you could order them in the theatre themselves. We've got the advertising boards here, and then you could go back to Ramsey and Muspratt to collect your prints when they would be done. And then these are original prints, a little bit of silvering just on the first picture here, and then we can, they're really nice just to use for examples of what people were wearing on stage. So we've got lots of those for quite a period of time, gives you an idea of kind of stage outfits and what people were wearing, etc. And then we've got the studio itself on the left, and on the right is a picture of them at the 1952 agricultural fair. So it kind of gives you an idea of what they look like, what they decided to put in, and the kind of photos that they were framing for exhibition themselves. We also have some of their Soviet photos. Unfortunately, both Helen and Lettice both went to Soviet Russia, both took photos on 2 different trips. I think these are by Lettice, I'm not sure. Unfortunately, they have very similar handwriting and seem completely incapable of writing anybody's name on anything ever. So yeah, to be honest, I've checked with various people who knew both of them, and they still shrug and go, "I have no idea," almost all of the time. So I think these are Lettice. I'm not sure. But yeah, moving on, we've got Philip Alexander Lake Brunney. He joins the studio. Well, he joins the Cambridge Photographic Club in 1934, gets a job at the studio off the back of his portfolio. He helps Lettice out a lot when Helen moves to Oxford. Lettice was never really the best person at figures or business, stuff like that. And he basically takes over starting doing the books, stuff like that. Second World War, he goes off to war. He's in a aerial photographic unit teaching people how to take aerial photos, lots of heavy glass equipment, etc. He's still interested in aerial photos. We've got various later photos by him when he returns to Cambridge, and he becomes a director of the firm when he returns after his work in World War II. And he's the person who does a lot of their commercial shots. He moves off to aero research at Duxford in 1958. Duxford, Cambridge is RAF Duxford, one of the big originally American forces bases here. And he's also a collector of antique photographic equipment, so he's pops up in various auction houses occasionally, apparently, as well. So the Ramsey and Muspratt commercial negatives, they're mostly on safety film, although some of the earlier ones in the 1930s are on nitrates and are a complete pain. There's lots of pub photos. Ramsey, this is Whitbread, but we also have Green King in the 1950s basically decided they want photos of every pub they own in Cambridgeshire, which if anybody ever been to a pub in Cambridgeshire knows that that's a lot of pubs. Green King is basically a monopoly of pubs in Cambridge, so he gets lots of work from doing that. But he's probably best known locally for taking photos of King's Chapel, because Philip Brunney gets a contract to they take the glass out of King's Chapel before the war, just to hide it off away. I think it goes to Aberystwyth in Wales, and they need to know where to put it back again once they finish taking it out. And Philip Brunney gets the contract to take photos of every pane of glass that gets removed, so they know they've got an extra sketch of where to put it all back once they've finished. So that's a really big deal. And then he also gets another contract to re-photograph them all once they've been replaced as well. So I mean, this is, you know, a big deal contract for someone who at the time was relatively young. Nicholas Lee, he takes over the studio when Lettice Ramsey retires, straight from college. It sounds like Lettice Lee basically went along while he was at college and wanted to interview various photographers who'd been in business a while. And well, at this point, Lettice Ramsey had been in business getting over 40 years in Cambridge, and she was wanting to retire, greatly interested that somebody actually cared what she had to say, and pretty much just like, oh yes, you can buy my business, can't you? And he goes, I suppose I can, yes. And yeah, struggles by the sound of it. He does move all of the Palmer Clarke wooden boxes up to Sutton Coldfield. We'll see pictures of those later, but the massive job. There's some very funny photos of them bringing them all back to Cambridge again in a removals lorry to because basically he phones up the library and says, oh, you know those negatives we've been talking to you about that you might want? And they go, yes. And they go, oh, I might have moved them to a garage in Sutton Coldfield. Do you still want them? And they go, oh. And then hire a removals van to go get them again. So they came back to Cambridge and amusingly moved just round the corner where our central library is. But yeah, so some very funny photos of them loading all this stuff up in this van. But yeah, so he sold it on rather quickly afterwards to Peter Lofts, and here is Peter. He's got Cambridge Revisited website, so if you'd like to know more about what he got to, I think he's writing a book at the moment, so it's well worth a contact on the actual history of the studio. His mother sorted, relabeled and rebagged the majority of the Ramsey Muspratt portrait negatives, which I am massively grateful for, because it must have been a huge job. They're all nicely labelled up now. So that was brilliant of her. Big fan. But yeah, talking about the negatives, we actually have various runs of negatives in the collection. The oldest are the Palmer Clarke Red Box series. They're mostly actually a bit of a misnomer. They're earlier than Palmer Clarke. Mostly negs by Lunn. These were stored, as you can see, in the original neg boxes. We didn't have any kind of list at all of what they were or who they were or anything apart from here's a load of negatives in some red boxes. And so we had a team of volunteers list them, rebag them, keeping any wrappings that have notes on or details of the photographer or dates or anything really. And then reboxed all the negatives for us, and then here are the finished articles in the store. So they were brilliant. They've done a very detailed listing of what's written on the negative, a description of what is worn, the pose, any props, anything you can see in the background, so plants, brass oogits, cups. Sometimes people want photos of things like that, and they've also done a lot of the work researching people as they've been going along. So they're the ones who've been putting in the details about who each student is, and a lot of more interest added for the listing itself. So you get an idea of not just who are the the fact that this person had a photograph taken, but this is this person, they lived here, they were from here, this is what they went off to go do, that kind of thing. So that's really helpful. Well, amazingly well done to them. So, and they are, we had a bit of a long story. We had a set of negatives that had gone off. Well, we've changed sites in 2006, and so basically everything in the collection had to move out to an off-site store, and a lot of it moved back in again when the collection reopened in 2009, but some of it didn't, and that was a decent chunk of the other half of the Palmer Clarke collection that wasn't in the wooden boxes I'm about to show you. And yeah, so they're now listing all of that lot. So we're up to about, I think they've done about 10,000 negatives. So it kind of gives you an idea of some of the scale that they're going through. Talking about the wooden boxes, here are what they look like. They're designed by Frederick Sanderson himself, and they're the original boxes for the that the studio was using themselves, that they've gone off to Sutton Coldfield and come back again. This is what they look like. They've all been labelled up with our negative number box on the side, which isn't the same negative numbers that they were using in studio, but gives us an idea of where they all are. Here's what they look like to actually open. And you can see that on the lid there is at least a basic list of a surname and who you're looking at, man, woman, child, that kind of thing. And then these were listed slightly earlier by the Cambridgeshire Family History Society, and that was less detailed. They just give a name list, so you get a surname, an address, sometimes initials, and you might get man, woman, child. Although sometimes what they say is woman actually turns out to be lady's cat. So, you know, you might not necessarily get exactly what you asked for. So that can be quite fun. The Ramsey Muspratt card index. This is Ramsey Muspratt themselves had a card index to figure out where exactly everybody's negatives were, and this was kept in 2 filing cabinets. And I have over lockdown typed one of them up and turned it into a spreadsheet. So you're looking at about 45,000 cards, leading to say 5, 10, 15 negs per number. So it gives you an idea of the kind of scale that they're looking at. So what can you see from the card? Well, you've got a name, you get an address, you get a negative number, which is the important bit, links you to the negatives themselves. You get a date that they actually wanted the picture being taken on. You also get if they wanted a resit, or if you wanted particular sizes, or etc., or like, please remove this mole, or please make my teeth look whiter, that kind of thing. And you also get on the back if anybody, if people, forces people in particular, they usually give a forces address with their forces number, which can be very helpful, and sometimes also give, oh, please send this one out to Miss Auntie Whatsit in Timbuktu, for example. So it gives you a nice, I mean, I've managed to do a free generation family tree just from literally just these card index without any looking at anything else. So that's quite nice. It kind of sees various of the women will have crossed out with Miss blah blah, crossed out now Mrs. blah blah, and then you see them getting married, and then you start seeing the kids go through, and sometimes you get the kids getting married as well, etc., etc. So that's quite nice. Evidently, they're a company that people keep going back to. So I mean, then these lead to the negatives themselves, and these are the ones that Peter Lofts' mum renumbered, rebagged. And this is how we store them in filing cabinet in our store, and it kind of gives you an idea of the numbers that you're getting per negative bag. And one quite nice thing is that because our photos are the studio photos, you don't just get the ones that they wanted printing at the time, you also get everything. So you get the one where someone had their eyes shut, or they, thought they looked funny, or that kind of thing. So we can do copies of all of the pictures that are there, and not just the one or two that they might have bothered to actually pay for and get printed. And one quite nice story that we've had recently is that a gentleman in Australia, unfortunately, was the bushfire, and his entire house went up, including all his wedding photos. But his wedding photos were by Ramsey and Muspratt. And so he went, "Do you have my wedding photos?" And where I went, who are you? Where were you living at the time? I'll go check. And it turns out, yes, we did. And he was able to have a complete set of his entire set of wedding photos rescanned and back to him in Australia by the end of the week. So that was really nice. We ended up putting that out as a press release. So it kind of gives you an idea of the kind of things that we hold here and what you're likely to find. And if you're wanting to find where you'll find these listings, all of the list of negatives that I've been talking about, including basically all of the information that I've used for this talk, and a load more about basically anybody who's ever done commercial photography in Cambridge, can be found on Fading Images site, which is by Les Waters, who I believe might be listening. This is a fabulous website, and is, if you want to know about photography in Cambridgeshire, this is where you want to go. And it's also where you'll find all the details about exactly what we've got, how to ask for it, what things look like, etc., etc. It's well worth a look. It's really excellent. And that's me for the time being. So that's how you can, my name again, and how you can get in touch with me. So if anybody's got any questions, I'm very willing to.
Thank you, Mary. That was absolutely remarkable, and such an interesting collection you're custodian of. Some of it was, well, a lot of it was new to me, but it was nice to hear about Frederick Sanderson, who I know a number of people in the audience tonight will be very familiar with him and his cameras and equipment. And in fact, just as a side comment, in fact, when I was at Christie's in the 80s and 90s, I came across Mr. Brunney he used to buy from Christie's and buy cameras, and I had no idea about his background. So that's put him in a new light for me. So thank you for doing that. We've got some questions coming in on the chat, so please add any more. And there's a couple that come through directly to me. So I'm going to start with those, and I'll come to the chat ones in just a second. So there's a general question here about how do you preserve the photographs and photographic roll film that you're holding?
Well, we don't have much roll film that's still rolled, if you see what I mean. We generally try and store it flat, although we do have a little bit that's still actually it's still in rolls because of historical reasons mostly. Mostly it's negative bags. Probably not ideal how we actually store them, but yeah, in the cool, in the dark, in boxes, so you know what it is that you've got. Always a good start. Ideally, they'd be separate. So I mean, particularly the glass negatives. That's why we went and reboxed all of them, because they were starting to stick together. That's really not good. You don't want that. But yeah, as long as it's cold, dark, and not too damp, you're probably in for a winner. But yeah, don't talk to me about nitrate negatives. I hate nitrate negatives. They need to go and not be so flammable. But yeah, that will do for most of your glass and your safety. And if anybody would like to tell me more about nitrate negatives, please feel free to get in touch, because we do have a few, and I shudder to think about what we're going to do with them. But yeah.
And then another general questions come in about how do you use the collection? How's it used by the library and more generally within Cambridge? Because it does seem such a wonderful resource you've got there.
Well, I mean, a lot of the time it's people interested in family history. Have you got a picture of my great granny? I don't know. Let's have a look. Sometimes it's I'm researching this business. Do you have a picture of this person who used to work at this business? Sometimes, yes, we do. That's always fun. Sometimes it's I'm from a local history society. We're researching everybody who is buried in this graveyard. have you got photos of any of these people? Sometimes it's literally just, I'm doing people from Central Library. It's November. I want to do a display. Have you got any photos of people with big moustaches? Yes, we do. Would you like me to send you some? Yes, I mean, it gets used for all kinds of things. Probably not always what people might expect us to be using it for, but lots of. Well, sometimes it's like we get Anglo Ruskin University does a creative writing course, and they come in and want photos that they could use of characters for people's books. So yeah, we get asked lots of different weird questions, and we generally try and provide something that would be suitable. But yes, it is a massive resource, and we do use it all the time.
And then Erin Elizabeth is asking how much of the collection has been digitized.
Well, that's an interesting question. The American Forces people, they are digitized. They are on the Cambridgeshire Archives website because we can't, for stupid council reasons, we can't put them on our website. But if you do a search for Cambridgeshire Archives' catalogue and put American Forces, then you'll be able to find those and see who that we have. We do have some. Yeah, it's mostly we digitize them when people ask us for particular people. But we do big displays of when listing projects are finished, that kind of thing, of a large collection of negatives. And so those are mostly the ones that we use for random people from the university who want a random person, often get sent those.
And thank you for that. And Lorraine is asking, do you have a favourite photograph from the collection and why?
We have a few photos of people taking photos, which I always think is brilliant fun. So they're probably my favourites. Or just like we have various people like my other favourite photo, the head of the Cambridge Police Force came in and wanted a photograph of him, but he also wanted a photo of his gun. So we have a photo of his gun because he thought that this was fabulous and he wanted a photograph of it. So I think that's quite nice. And we also get loads of pictures of horses, cows, dogs, pets, lots of cats, many pictures of ladies wanting pictures of their cats, which are always quite good fun.
I think what's interesting, you showed a couple of pictures of people of colour, and I just wondered what's the sort of wider representation from the collection? Are there more examples of people from, for example, Ghana or Africa or Asia, actually?
Yes, a lot of the students, I mean, there's lots of British students as well, but yes, you get a far higher percentage of Indian students, African students than you'd expect, considering how many of them there were studying in Cambridge at the time. Mostly, I presume, because they wanted a photograph to send back to their parents to say, look, here I am, I made it to Cambridge. So yeah, basically, particularly the older ones, there's a group in Cambridge called Black Cantabs who are basically going through and finding Black and ethnic minority people who were studied in Cambridge. And so every time we find somebody, I always send it off to them and go, look, we found another person, you can add them to your website. So that's really nice. So they're always deeply interested in finding any more Black people who have studied in Cambridge. And so quite often we can come up with photos for them, which is always lovely.
Thank you. And then and again, another general collection, which may be from the website, but how do people get access to the collection? Or firstly, is it accessible? And if so, how do people access the collection physically?
Well, I mean, if you find anything that you want to see that is accessible, Les Waters' Fading Images it's got all of our lists on. So, but also just come in. It's all here. It's all on site. We can go get stuff out for you as you wait. If you'd like to, if you have ever happened to be in Cambridge, feel free to come in, and I can show people around by appointment of the actual store themselves, etc. So I mean, we're usually pretty friendly. The answer will probably be yes. that's fine. But yeah, just drop me an email.
See, Les has joined us this evening, so thank you, Les, for all the work that you've done on the collection as well. So it's the thumbs up from Mary there as well, which is great. So I think we've reached the end of our questions, unless there's any final questions from our audience. If not, then it just remains for me to say a massive thank you, Mary, for your time this evening and for sharing your knowledge and the work that you and Les have done over making the collection accessible and preserving it. It is a remarkable survival to have such a long longevity of negatives and in fact any studio on that site. It's not quite the longest, but it's got a very good track record, and I can I appreciate from the local history point of view how important that is to people within Cambridgeshire. But it's also of national significance as well. So thank you for looking after that, and thank you again for sharing your knowledge with us this evening. And again, thank you to our audience for joining us this evening. Look out for future talks in this series. We'll send out more details as we arrange them. We're trying to do them monthly, but there may be a slight gap over the summer, so look out for that. And thank you for joining us, and thank you, Mary, for your time this evening. Good night, everyone.